Mid-dinner, Jack slams the letters on the table, his father's handwriting. I never wanted any of you. The room freezes. Forks stop halfway to mouths. Emily's hands start shaking so hard the plate rattles. She knows that handwriting too, because she wrote those letters. Every single one. And now, Jack is looking straight at her and asking whose side she was really on. Pass the salt, please. Martha's voice cut through the clink of silverware, sharper than intended, her fork scraping against the porcelain plate like a reluctant confession. The dining room, with its polished oak table and walls lined in faded floral wallpaper, held the heavy scent of roasted chicken and overcooked vegetables. A meal Emily had prepared with mechanical precision, her hands still faintly scented with garlic, despite washing them twice. David reached for the shaker without looking up, his movements deliberate, as if any haste might shatter the fragile equilibrium. Here you go, he murmured, sliding it across the linen cloth, his eyes fixed on the steam rising from his untouched potatoes. He wanted this to work. This simple gathering, a threadbare ritual to stitch them back together, without probing too deep. Emily sat at the far end, her napkin twisted in her lap, fingers tracing the embroidered edges. She glanced at her mother, then away, the weight of Martha's gaze pressing like an uninvited hand on her shoulder. The chicken's good tonight, she offered softly, her voice threading through the quiet, hopeful that praise might bridge the gap widening inside her. But the words landed flat, absorbed by the hush that followed. Martha speared a carrot, her lips pursing as she chewed. It's dry, Emily. You always overseason it. The criticism slipped out, habitual as breathing, yet laced with something rawer, an ache for acknowledgement that her own efforts, her own unspoken hurts, weren't invisible. She set her fork down, the sound echoing like a small accusation. Remember when we used to talk about these things, not just eat in silence? David cleared his throat, the sound muffled by the hum of the old ceiling fan overhead, its blades slicing through the still air. Let's not pick at it now, he said, his tone even, placating, though his shoulders hunched under the strain. Conflict was a shadow he couldn't outrun, not here, not when peace felt like the only anchor. He speared a piece of meat, forcing a bite, the flavors bland against the knot in his chest. Emily's gaze dropped to her plate, the golden light from the chandelier casting long shadows across the food she couldn't taste. Isolation clawed at her edges, the fear of being unseen twisting tighter with each averted eye. She wanted them to see her, the real her, not the dutiful daughter serving up perfection to hide the fractures. I tried a new recipe, she whispered, almost to herself, a flicker of hope in the admission, as if sharing might coax out the understanding she craved. The clock on the mantel ticked onward, relentless, marking moments that stretched like taffy pulled too thin. Martha leaned back, her chair creaking under her, eyes narrowing at David. You never say anything. It's like we're ghosts in this house. Her words hung, critical barbs wrapped in frustration, alienating even as she yearned for them to pierce through and validate her storm. David pushed his plate away, the scrape loud in the confined space, his overwhelm bubbling just beneath the surface. I'm saying we're fine. Can't we just be? But the plea rang hollow, his avoidance a veil over the superficial bonds that left him adrift. Emily reached for her water glass, the cool condensation slick against her palm, a small comfort in the thickening unease. The dinner continued, forks rising and falling, but the unspoken wounds festered beneath the surface, old resentments resurfacing in sidelong glances and half-formed sighs. Yet in the quiet spaces between, a fragile hope lingered, whispering that one honest word might mend what silence had broken. The clink of silverware faded into a heavy silence, the air thickening with unspoken grievances that hung like smoke from the dying embers of daylight filtering through lace curtains. Emily's hands trembled slightly as she passed the salt, her gaze lingering on each face around the table. Martha's pinched features, the siblings' averted eyes, nurturing a seed of suspicion amid the melancholy weight of shared history. In that oppressive hush, the fragile peace teetered, waiting for the spark that would ignite the unraveling. "Why do you always have to twist everything I say, Dad? It's like you're not even listening." Jack's voice cracked across the table, his fork stabbing into a mound of mashed potatoes that had gone cold and lumpy. The dining room chandelier cast fractured light over the half-eaten plates, shadows pooling in the etched crystal glasses where wine sat untouched. David's hand paused mid-reach for the salt shaker Martha had requested moments ago, his knuckles paling against the wood grain. "Jack, that's enough," David murmured, his tone a weary anchor, eyes flicking toward the window, where the curtains hung limp, as if holding back the weight of the evening. He wanted this to dissolve, the words to evaporate like steam from the serving dish. But the air thickened with the savory residue of chicken fat and wilted greens, clinging to their clothes. Martha leaned forward, her napkin twisting in her lap like a coiled spring. "No, David, let him finish. For once, let's hear what's really eating at him, instead of sweeping it under the rug." Her words sliced sharp, laced with the bitterness of unspoken grievances. Years of meals like this, where her pleas for more than silence met only nods and deflections. She needed him to see her, to validate the storm brewing inside. But his passivity only fueled the fire. Jack shoved his chair back an inch, the legs scraping a low groan against the floorboards. "You think you're so perfect, both of you, acting like everything's fine while you ignore what happened last summer." His face flushed, confusion twisting his features as he searched for the right words, his drive to break free from their mold pushing him toward the edge. But beneath it, the fear gnawed. What if this severed the only tether he knew? David's fork clattered softly against his plate. "Last summer? Jack, we talked about this. It's in the past." "No!" Jack burst out, his voice pitching higher, rebellious spark igniting. "You didn't talk. You buried it. Like when Mom found those letters from Aunt Clara, the ones Dad hid in the attic, the ones saying he wanted to leave us all behind, start over somewhere else." The words tumbled free, accidental as a spilled glass, his eyes widening as realization dawned. He hadn't meant to voice it, not like this, not the secret he'd overheard in hushed arguments, the yellowed envelope stuffed behind old photo albums, revealing David's fleeting escape fantasies from the very family he now clung to preserve. Silence crashed down, heavier than the crystal above. Martha's breath hitched, her gaze snapping to David, sharp as shattered porcelain. Suspicion bloomed in her eyes, a slow poison seeping through the fragile veneer of their unity. Had he truly considered abandoning them? Her critical edge sharpened, probing for the truth she feared would confirm her deepest dismissals. David's shoulders sagged, the overwhelmed lines of his face deepening, his avoidance cracking under the weight. "Martha, it's not—" "I never would have—" But she held up a hand, the gesture trembling with restrained fury. "Letters? From Clara? David, what else have you kept from us?" Her voice wavered, frustration giving way to a raw vulnerability, seeking the validation that now felt like a distant hope amid the ruins. Jack slumped back, confusion swirling with regret, his rebellion masking the terror of what he'd unleashed. The room pressed in, the scent of cooling food turning cloying, a contemplative hush settling as the fractures widened. Yet in the dim light, a faint thread of possibility lingered. Perhaps this breaking open could mend what silence had warped. If only they dared face it. The argument hung in the air like smoke long after the plates were cleared, the dining room emptying into shadowed hallways where unspoken fears took root. That night, sleep evaded them all, the house creaking under the weight of fractured bonds, each crevice echoing with the dread of deeper fractures. By morning, the oppressive quiet pressed heavier, a fragile hope flickering amid the melancholy as the family gathered once more, hearts braced against the inevitable unraveling. "Can we just stop this right now and have a real family meeting?" Jack's voice sliced through the lingering echo of his earlier outburst, his eyes flicking from the congealed gravy pooling on his plate to the faces across the table. The scent of overcooked roast lingered, thick and cloying. mingling with the faint metallic tang of untouched silverware. Martha paused mid-sip of her water, the glass hovering inches from her lips, droplets beating along its rim like unshed tears. She set it down with deliberate care, the soft clink amplifying in the stifled quiet. Frustration etched deeper lines around her mouth, her drive to voice the ache inside her, clashing against the wall of silence she'd built over years. A family meeting? Jack, that's the last thing we need. Pretending like words can fix what's broken. It's just more noise. Her tone carried the weight of old wounds, sharp and unyielding, yet beneath it flickered a desperate plea for someone to hear her, to validate the storm she kept bottled. Emily shrank into her chair, her fingers twisting the napkin in her lap until it frayed at the edges. The fabric's rough weave bit into her skin, a small anchor against the rising tide of anxiety that made her chest tighten. She wanted nothing more than to be seen, to feel the family's warmth wrap around her like a forgotten embrace. But confrontation loomed like a shadow she couldn't outrun. Her eyes darted to the floor, tracing the intricate pattern of the rug where threads had begun to unravel, mirroring the fraying bonds around her. Isolation clawed at her thoughts. What if speaking up only pushed them further away? Jack leaned forward, elbows thudding against the polished oak, his rebellious spark dimming under the confusion that gnawed at him. He craved a path beyond the expectations that chained him here, to this table of half-truths and averted gazes. But the fear of shattering what little held them together rooted him in place. Come on, Mom. Emily? We've got all this stuff piling up. Past fights, things we never say. If we don't talk, it'll just keep eating us alive. Remember that time, Dad? No. Martha's interruption was swift, her voice a barrier slamming shut. She folded her arms, the sleeves of her blouse whispering against the fabric, her critical edge sharpening as denial surged to protect the fragile illusion of their perfection. To air grievances meant admitting the cracks, meant risking the dismissal that terrified her most. Yet in her pause, a hesitant light glimmered. Perhaps, just perhaps, this could bridge the gap if they dared. Emily's breath hitched, a soft gasp lost in the oppressive hush. Fear coiled in her gut, cold and insistent, whispering of rejection's sting. She lifted her gaze briefly, meeting Jack's with wide, searching eyes, her withdrawn shell cracking just enough to reveal the hope she clung to like a lifeline. The room pressed in, walls echoing with unspoken histories, the creak of floorboards settling, the distant hum of a clock marking time they couldn't reclaim. Jack's proposal hung there, fragile as the steam rising from forgotten coffee in the kitchen beyond. A tentative olive branch in the gathering dusk of their fractures. Martha exhaled slowly, the sound ragged, her frustration warring with the pull toward connection. Fine, but don't expect miracles. The words emerged reluctant, laced with the melancholy of what might be lost if they failed, yet tinged with that faint, flickering hope that understanding could mend what silence had torn. Emily nodded almost imperceptibly, her twisted napkin falling limp, as the weight of possibility settled over them. Heavy, but not entirely crushing. The weight of Jack's words settled like dust in the stale air, unmet by any response. Only the oppressive silence of averted gazes and cooling plates. In the middle sibling's chest, frustration coiled tight. A melancholic ache laced with a faint, hopeful longing for the family they once knew. Contemplating the chasm widening before them, they felt the pull of isolation. A quiet resolve forming amid the rich shadows of unspoken regrets, urging a step toward solitude. Emily shoved her chair back, the scrape of wood against tile echoing like a reluctant confession in the dim-lit dining room. Forks clattered softly against porcelain as the sudden motion rippled through the table. But no one spoke. The remnants of the roast sat cold and accusing, its fatty sheen catching the low glow from the overhead fixture, while the air thickened with the unspoken weight of half-eaten meals. Jack's gaze snapped to her, his fork hovering mid-air, gravy dripping in slow, viscous strands. What the hell? His voice cracked, laced with that familiar edge of rebellion, the one he wielded like a shield against the family's quiet expectations. He leaned forward, elbows thudding onto the tablecloth, his knuckles whitening around the utensil. Deep down, the confusion churned. Why couldn't they just break free, all of them, from this suffocating script of normalcy? But her movement stirred something sharper, a fear that if she walked now, the fragile thread of their bond might snap for good. David cleared his throat, his hands folding neatly in his lap as if to contain the tremor threatening to spill out. "Emily, sit down. We were just talking." His words hung there, passive as always, a desperate bid to smooth the jagged edges before they cut too deep. He avoided her eyes, focusing instead on the frayed edge of the table runner, his mind racing through the motions of peacekeeping. Conflict loomed like a shadow he couldn't outrun. And yet, beneath the overwhelm, a faint ache pulsed, the longing for something real, a connection that didn't demand he bury his own unraveling heart. She paused at the threshold, her fingers gripping the doorframe, nails digging into the painted wood until splinters threatened to give. Anxiety coiled in her chest, tight and unyielding, urging her to retreat into silence, as she always did. But tonight, the withdrawal felt like surrender, her drive to be seen warring with the terror of rejection. "Talking? This isn't talking, Dad. It's just noise." Her voice emerged soft, almost lost amid the oppressive hush that followed Jack's plea for a meeting. She glanced back, catching the flicker of hurt in her brother's eyes. The way David's shoulders slumped under invisible load, resentment bubbled up, unspoken accusations piling like the congealed gravy on her plate. Why wouldn't they reach out, truly listen, before everything fractured? Jack pushed his own plate away, the ceramic screeching in protest. "Don't do this, Em. Stay. We can figure it out." His confusion twisted into urgency, the rebellious spark dimming under the fear of isolation. He wanted his path, yes, away from the expectations that defined him as the troubled son, but not at the cost of this, not without them. David nodded faintly, his voice a murmur. "Please, for us." Emily's breath caught, the room's stale warmth pressing against her skin like a too-tight embrace. She could feel the pull, that quiet hope threading through the melancholy, a whisper that maybe, if she stayed, understanding might bloom from the ruins. But the bottled emotions surged, demanding release, and with a final aching glance at their faces, Jack's defiant plea, David's weary hope, she turned away. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving the dining room steeped in a heavier silence. The scent of uneaten food, now a bitter reminder of what lingered unsaid. In the hallway beyond, her footsteps faded, each one echoing the longing that bound them still, fragile and unbroken. As the evening deepened into night, the dining room's chill seeped into the shadowed halls, where the family's unspoken grievances hung like frayed threads in the dim lamplight. Emily retreated to the living room, her footsteps muffled on the worn carpet, regret coiling in her gut like smoke from a dying fire, an ache for bridges unbuilt amid the roast's forgotten warmth. Upstairs, restless sighs echoed through thin walls, vulnerabilities stirring in the oppressive quiet, a contemplative hush pregnant with the promise of raw, hopeful reckoning. The scrape's echo faded into a silence that pressed against Emily's chest like an unspoken verdict. She stood frozen, her napkin twisted in her fist, the linen fibers rough against her palm, while the scent of congealed gravy clung to the air, thick and unforgiving. Across the table, David's fork hovered mid-air, peas rolling off the tines onto his plate with a soft, indifferent plop, each one a tiny abandonment mirroring the distance in his eyes. Martha broke first, her chair legs groaning as she pushed back, the sound a low growl in the dim room. "That's it then? We just sit here, pretending the world's not crumbling around us?" Her words sliced through the quiet, sharp as the knife she'd abandoned beside her half-eaten slice of bread, its crust flaking like dried tears. Frustration etched lines around her mouth, deeper than the morning's worries. her drive to be heard bubbling over into criticism that she couldn't quite temper. She leaned forward, elbows thudding against the wood, searching David's face for the validation that always seemed just out of reach. "David, say something! Or are you too busy playing the peacemaker to notice your own daughter drowning?" David's shoulders slumped, the weight of the evening settling into his bones like damp wool. He set the fork down carefully, the clink reverberating too loudly in his ears. A futile attempt to restore order. Peace, that fragile illusion he clung to, slipped further away with every heartbeat. "Martha, please," he murmured, his voice a threadbare whisper, avoiding the storm in her gaze. Overwhelmed, he glanced at Emily, willing her to speak, to bridge the gap he couldn't. But his fear of the turmoil gnawed at him, shadowing his words with superficial calm. Inside, regrets coiled. All those evenings he'd nodded through her rants, bearing his own ache to keep the house from fracturing. Now, it teetered anyway. Emily's breath caught, a shallow hitch that betrayed her withdrawal. She wanted them to see her, the anxiety twisting her gut like over-tightened strings. But confrontation loomed, like isolation's cold embrace. Her shadow whispered to stay silent, bottle the hurt until it burst. Yet the pressure mounted, resentments from unspoken slights piling like the untouched salad wilting in its bowl, leaves curling brown at the edges. I didn't mean to," she started, voice trembling, but Martha cut her off. "Didn't mean to what? Push away every time we try to reach you?" Martha's hands flew up, knocking over the salt shaker, grains scattered like brittle regrets across the cloth. Her criticism sharpened, alienating even as she sought understanding, fear of dismissal fueling the outburst. "You're just like him, Emily, hiding behind that wall of nothing. And you, David, enabling it all with your silence." The words landed like blows, forcing cracks in their facades. David finally met her eyes, his passivity cracking under the weight. "I'm not hiding. I'm trying to hold us together." But the admission tasted bitter. Regret flooding in for the superficial bonds he'd nurtured at the cost of real connection. Emily sank back into her chair, the wood cool against her spine, tears pricking as isolation's fear gripped tighter. Yet in the raw exposure, a fragile hope flickered, the first thread of true seeing. Martha's chest heaved, her frustration ebbing into something softer, vulnerable. She reached across the table, fingers brushing Emily's sleeve, the fabric's weave a tentative link. Regret shadowed her features now, for the alienation her sharpness had wrought. In the oppressive hush that followed, the cold roast seemed less accusing, the dim light a gentle veil over their unraveling, whispering that perhaps, in facing the fractures, they might mend. As the evening's tension curdled into a heavy night, the family splintered into shadowed corners of the old house, where silence amplified every creak and sigh. Emily's napkin lay abandoned on the table, a crumpled testament to the unraveling. Hours later, in the youngest sibling's room, grief coiled like smoke around her chest, the air thick with the ghosts of lost unity. Yet, amid the oppressive hush, a fragile spark flickered, her hand hovering over the phone, poised to shatter the long-imposed exile. Jack's fork clattered against his plate, shattering the fragile quiet that had settled over the dining room like dust on forgotten shelves. The sound ricocheted off the walls, pulling David's gaze from the congealed gravy pooling at the edge of his untouched meal. Martha paused mid-sip of her water, the glass hovering inches from her lips, her eyes narrowing as if the noise had personally offended her. "Can't you just eat like a normal person?" Martha's voice sliced through the tension, sharp and unyielding, her frustration bubbling over from the silence that had trapped them all since the earlier scrape, whatever that had been about Emily, though no one dared name it now. She set the glass down with deliberate force, the base thudding against the oak table, sending ripples across the water's surface. Her drive to be heard clawed at her, but David's passive slump in his chair only fueled the fire. He wanted peace, craved it like air. Yet here he was, overwhelmed by the weight of their unspoken barbs, his own feelings buried so deep they might as well be stone. David cleared his throat, soft and hesitant, his hands folding neatly in his lap to avoid the mess on the table. Martha, let's not. Not what? Not point out how he's acting like a child? She turned to Jack, her criticism a veil for the validation she so desperately sought. Terrified that her words would scatter like leaves in wind, dismissed once more. The room pressed in, the faded wallpaper peeling at the corners, the faint metallic tang of cooled food mingling with the musty scent of the old house, amplifying every resentment that had simmered unchecked. Jack shoved back from the table, his chair legs scraping the floorboards in a low growl that echoed his confusion. At 19, he rebelled against the invisible chains of their expectations. Yet the fear of losing them gnawed at his core, a shadow masking insecurities he couldn't voice. You think this is about me? You're the one picking fights over nothing. His voice cracked, not with anger, but something rawer. The chaos of the evening. Emily's frozen stare, the twisted napkin still clutched in her absent hand, pushing him to the brink. He paced to the sideboard, where the family phone sat, its cord coiled like a serpent. The weight of it all pressed on his chest, misunderstandings piling like bricks. David's avoidance, Martha's barbs, his own tangled need to break free without shattering everything. In a surge of desperation, Jack snatched the receiver, dialing with fingers that moved too fast, too sure. The estranged aunt, Grandma's sister, unseen since the funeral 5 years back, whose number he'd unearthed from a dusty address book in the attic. The line clicked, then rang, each tone a hammer blow to the family's fragile facade. Aunt Clara? It's Jack. We need help. Things are falling apart here. Martha's face drained of color, her mouth opening in protest. But no words came. David's eyes widened, the peaceful illusion he'd clung to fracturing like thin ice. Jack's plea hung in the air, a crossing of lines that bound them tighter in resentment, yet whispered a faint, melancholic hope, that outside eyes might mend what silence had broken. The oppressive hush returned, heavier now, laced with the sadness of what they'd let fester. The dial tones echo a somber dirge for the family they might yet salvage. The clatter echoed into a heavier silence, the dining room shadows lengthening as utensils were set aside and chairs scraped back. In the oppressive hush that followed, each retreated to solitary corners of the house, minds churning with half-formed choices and the fraying threads of their shared life. Yet, amid the melancholy weight, a quiet hope stirred, like dawn's first light piercing a storm, whispering of bonds that, though unraveling, might yet be reforged in the fires of revelation. I can't take this anymore. The words burn in Jack's throat, unspoken, as the echo of his fork fades into the heavy silence. His plate sits half empty, peas scattered like accusations across the white china. Martha's glass finally meets the table with a soft clink, her fingers lingering on the stem, knuckles pale against the crystal. She stares at him, her lips parting as if to scold, but no sound comes. Emily, hunched at the far end, pushes her napkin into folds, her fork abandoned beside a congealing mound of mashed potatoes that smells faintly of overcooked milk and regret. Why? Martha's voice cracks first, low, and edged with the frustration she's carried all evening like an ill-fitting coat. She leans forward, elbows on the scarred oak table, the wood's grain worn smooth from years of such meals. Jack, just tell us why you're doing this to us. Dropping out, running off to that city, it's like you're trying to erase everything we built. Her eyes, sharp usually, soften at the corners, pleading now for the validation she craves, even as her criticism sharpens the air between them. Jack shifts in his chair, the legs scraping against the linoleum floor, a sound like bones grinding. He wants to shout back, to claim the independence that's eluded him in this house of expectations. But the fear coils tighter. What if they turn away? What if his rebellion leaves him utterly alone? It's not about erasing you, Mom. It's about me finally figuring out who I am without all this. His voice wavers, rebellious fire dimming to confusion, and he glances at Emily, hoping for an ally in her quiet gaze. But Emily doesn't meet his eyes. Her hands twist the napkin into a knot, the fabric damp from her palms. The room presses in, the faded wallpaper peeling at the seams, the bulb overhead, casting long shadows that swallow the edges of the table. She's always been the one to swallow words, to retreat into the corners of conversations. But tonight, the bottle inside her overflows. A sob escapes, sharp and unbidden, her shoulders shaking as tears streak her cheeks. "You think you're the only one unraveling?" she whispers, voice muffled against her sleeve. The words tumble out, raw and unchecked. "I sit here every night, watching you two clash, pretending I'm fine. But I'm not. I feel like I'm disappearing and no one notices. I want you to see me." The breakdown ripples outward, shattering the pretense they've all clung to. Martha reaches across the table, her hand hovering before settling on Emily's arm, gentle, tentative, the critic yielding to something softer. "Oh, honey," she murmurs, her own eyes glistening, the fear of misunderstanding cracking her facade. Jack freezes, then slides his chair closer, his rebellious mask slipping to reveal the insecurity beneath. He places a hand on Emily's other shoulder, the touch awkward but real. "I see you. We all do. Maybe we can figure this out together, not apart." In that fragile circle, amid the cooling remnants of dinner and the weight of unspoken years, a thread of possibility glimmers. Hope, faint as dawn through grimy windows, whispering that bonds, though frayed, might yet mend. 3 days slipped by in the wake of that stifling dinner, each hour weighted with unspoken fractures. The family home, once a refuge, now pressed in with shadows of resentment, the air thick and unyielding. Jack's silence had rippled outward, leaving the youngest sibling adrift in quiet turmoil, her thoughts circling like dust motes in the dim afternoon light. Then, as unease coiled tighter in her chest, a faint chime pierced the hush. A message from the long-estranged relative, its words veiled in mystery, stirring a fragile thread of hope amid the gloom. That's when Jack realized the message wasn't a casual note from Aunt Clara. It was a fracture line running through the family's brittle history, one she'd concealed for decades. His phone screen glowed faintly in the dim living room, casting erratic shadows across the faded floral wallpaper that peeled at the corners like forgotten regrets. 3 days had passed since the dinner, since the peas lay scattered, and Martha's silence had sealed the evening like wax on a letter no one dared open. Now, with Emily curled on the sagging armchair, nursing a mug of tea gone cold, and David, pacing the threadbare rug with measured steps, Jack's thumb hovered over the words, "The truth about your father isn't what you think. Meet me tomorrow. Secrets bury us all." He lowered the phone, his breath catching in the still air thick with the scent of yesterday's coffee grounds, and the faint, metallic tang of unresolved tension. "It's from Aunt Clara," he said, voice cracking like thin ice. The room held its breath. Emily's mug paused midway to her lips, her eyes sharpening with that frustrated gleam she usually hid behind polite nods. David stopped pacing, his broad shoulders slumping, as if the weight of harmony he'd chased all evening had just doubled. "What does she want?" Emily asked, setting the mug down with deliberate care, though her fingers pressed white against the handle. She leaned forward, her dark hair falling across a face etched with lines too deep for her 25 years. Jack could see the storm brewing in her, the bottled words from dinner, the ones she'd swallowed to keep the peace. Her drive to speak her truth warred with the fear that it would push them all away, leaving her adrift in the isolation she dreaded most. Jack handed her the phone, his hand unsteady. "Read it. It's cryptic. Says something about Dad, secrets we've never heard." As Emily scanned the screen, her brow furrowed, a soft exhale escaping her, like air from a punctured tire. David moved closer, peering over her shoulder, his proactive resolve flickering against the unease that made his stomach twist. He hated this. the emotional undercurrents that threatened the superficial calm he clung to, the connections that never quite reached beneath the surface. "Secrets?" David echoed, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if speaking louder might summon the turmoil he feared. He rubbed his chin, eyes distant, caught between wanting to smooth this over and the nagging pull to dig deeper for the family's sake. Jack watched them both, his own uncertainty swelling like a tide. He needed to know his place here, amid the love he was terrified of losing. But his rebellious streak, the shadow that armored his insecurities, urged him to shatter the facade first. Emily's hand flew to her mouth, the phone slipping to her lap. "Oh, God," she murmured, tears welling sudden and hot. The dam broke then, her shoulders shaking as sobs tore free, raw and unfiltered. "I knew it. All these years, pretending everything's fine, but it's not. Dad's lies, Mom's silences, it's eating us alive." Her words spilled out, frustrated determination overriding the avoidance that had kept her silent so long. Jack knelt beside her, his arm tentative around her shoulders, while David froze, then sank onto the arm of the chair, his hand finally resting on hers. A small bridge over the chasm. In that moment, the oppressive weight of the room lightened just a fraction, unease threading through their shared vulnerability like a fragile promise. They were confronting it now, the hidden struggles surfacing one by one. And though the secrets loomed dark, a quiet hope stirred. Perhaps unraveling them could weave them closer. The realization clung to Jack like damp fog, seeping through the oppressive quiet of the living room and into his sleepless nights. Suspicion coiled tighter with each passing hour, a melancholic undercurrent laced with tentative hope that unveiling the fracture might mend something deeper. Days later, as the family converged in the dim parlor, shadows pooling like unspoken regrets, he carried the glowing message into their midst, the air heavy with contemplative dread and the faint promise of revelation. The faint glow of the phone screen yanked Emily back, Aunt Clara's laughter, brittle as autumn leaves, echoing from that long-ago porch swing where secrets first curdled into silence. She blinked hard, the living room's stale air pressing in like an uninvited guest, the faded wallpaper's floral ghosts whispering of buried summers. Her siblings, David slouched in the armchair, Martha perched on the sofa's edge, watched her with eyes sharpened by the dim lamp's amber haze. Emily's thumb hovered over the message, heart thudding against her ribs like a moth trapped in glass. "I can't keep this to myself anymore," she said, voice cracking the quiet. She thrust the phone forward, the screen's light carving hollows under her chin. "Aunt Clara didn't just drop a note, it's about Dad, what he did, all those years she covered for him." David leaned forward, elbows on knees, his calloused hands clasping like he could squeeze harmony from the air. The scent of his aftershave, sharp and medicinal, cut through the room's musty undercurrent of old books and untouched mail. "Emily, slow down. We were just talking about the estate papers. This, whatever it is, might be nothing. A misunderstanding." But his words faltered, gaze flicking to the screen, suspicion threading through his proactive mask. He wanted peace, yes, but not at the cost of this unraveling thread pulling at his own frayed edges. Martha's fingers twisted the hem of her sweater, knuckles pale against the wool's soft give. She peered at the message, her breath catching on the words that painted their father's shadow in stark, unforgiving lines. Debts, deceptions, a life half-lived in lies. This says he left her money to silence her. Why now, after all this time? Her tone dipped self-reflective, laced with that hopeful curiosity that masked her sharper judgments. Yet doubt flickered in her eyes, suspicion blooming like ink in water as she glanced between them. Are we sure this is real? Clara's been unreliable before. Emily's chest tightened, frustration boiling over the determination she'd nursed in secret. She'd bottled it too long, avoiding the fights, the tears that might isolate her further. But here, in this oppressive knot of familial breath and flickering light, the facade splintered. Unreliable? That's what we always say when it's too hard to face. Her voice rose, then broke, tears spilling hot and unbidden down her cheeks. She sank to the floor, knees folding beneath her, the rug's coarse fibers scraping her palms. I found letters, too, in the attic. He wasn't the man we pretended, and we've all known pieces, glimpses we ignored. David's face crumpled, his conflict surging forward despite the fear clawing at him. He slid from the chair, kneeling beside her, one hand hovering before settling on her shoulder, tentative, real for once, breaching his superficial barriers. I saw things when I was a kid. The late nights, the whispers. I thought ignoring it kept us together. His voice thickened, proactive resolve cracking into raw admission, the room's shadows deepening around his admission. Martha slid down too, her arm encircling Emily's waist, the warmth a fragile bridge over her fear of dismissal. I criticized him endlessly in my head, but never said it aloud, afraid you'd both think me cold. Suspicion lingered in her pause, eyes searching their faces for deceit, yet hope glinted there, a tentative light amid the melancholy weight. Maybe facing it doesn't break us. What if it mends? The three huddled close, breaths mingling in the heavy air, the phone forgotten on the floor like a spent fuse. Emily's sobs ebbed into shaky exhales. The mask shattered, but the pieces not yet scattered. Suspicion yielding to a contemplative hush where hidden struggles surfaced, raw and seeking solace. The echo of Aunt Clara's laughter lingered like a bruise as Emily rose from the sagging couch, the living room's oppressive hush urging her toward the door. Twilight bled into evening, carrying her through rain-slick streets to the old family home, where shadows pooled in the corners of the dining room. Amid the siblings' tentative circle, a contemplative silence stretched, laced with the faint, fearful pulse of buried resentments waiting to surface, yet threaded with the dim hope of mending what time had frayed. The faint metallic tang of blood lingered on Jack's lip where he'd bitten it during the earlier silence. He shifted in the worn armchair, the fabric scratching against his skin like an accusation. David leaned forward from the sofa's edge, his knuckles pale against the armrest, eyes searching the dim lamplight for some foothold in the unraveling conversation. Martha sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of a throw pillow, the threads pulling loose like unspoken regrets. "I've tried," David said, voice low and measured, as if each word were a stone, smoothed by years of avoidance. "All these years, pushing for us to just move forward, for harmony. But it's like we're all dancing around the same crack in the foundation." His gaze flicked to Martha, then Jack, proactive, yet shadowed by the fear that this confrontation might shatter everything. The room's shadows deepened, pressing in from the corners where faded photographs watched from the mantel, smiles frozen in time, binding them in a web of unacknowledged ache. Martha nodded slowly, her breath catching on the edge of hope. She wanted this, to peel back the layers and see them clearly, even if it meant her own voice trembling. "I hear you, David. Really. And Jack, you've been so quiet. Tell us where you fit in all this." Her tone carried that self-reflective warmth, but beneath it lurked the dread of being brushed aside, her critical edge sharpening as the words hung. Jack's eyes darted between them, uncertainty etching lines across his brow. He craved his place here, the family's anchor, terrified that one wrong word might sever it. "It's not that simple," he muttered, rebellious fire flickering behind the insecurity. "You two always act like you're holding it together, but I'm the one picking up the pieces." The air thickened as voices overlapped, David's pleas for unity clashing with Martha's probing questions. Jack's responses grew sharper, a defensive wall against the fear gnawing at his core. Then, in the heated swell, Martha's composure fractured. She set the pillow aside, her hands unclenching to reveal palms marked by faint crescent moons from her nails. "Enough," she whispered, the word blooming into something raw. "David, I can't pretend anymore. All this time, I've resented you. The way you glide over everything, never diving deep. You were the eldest, the one who should have seen it. But you left me carrying the weight alone. That summer after Mom left, when you just planned the next family trip like nothing happened. I hated you for it." David recoiled, the confession landing like a blow to his guarded heart. His drive for harmony twisted into turmoil, the conflict he'd feared, now a living thing between them. "Martha, I was trying to protect us," he said, voice cracking. But the words felt hollow even to him, exposing the superficial bonds he'd built to evade his own buried feelings. Jack froze, the fragile alliance they'd glimpsed, those tentative nods of understanding, splintering before his eyes. Fear coiled in his chest, cold and insistent. If even this bond broke, what was left? He reached out a hand, hesitant, toward Martha. But it hovered, trembling not from cliché, but from the terror of reaching into the void. Yet in that pause, a sliver of hope pierced the oppression. A shared glance, eyes meeting in the lamplight, acknowledging the pain without fleeing it. The confessions hung there, contemplative and heavy, binding them tighter in their unraveling truth. The silence thickened like smoke in the dim room, each breath a labored echo of fractured bonds. Jack's gaze drifted to the flickering lamplight, tracing shadows that mirrored the chasm widening within him. Hours blurred into a contemplative haze, the armchair's creak a relentless reminder of entrapment. Beneath the oppressive weight, a quiet longing for freedom stirred, fragile as dawn's first light, urging him toward the precipice of release. The echo of David's footsteps, long faded down the hallway. Only the three of them remained in the dim parlor, shadows pooling like spilled ink across the threadbare rug. Martha sat on the edge of the settee, her hands folded too tightly in her lap, knuckles blooming white as she watched Jack's face twist in the lamplight. Emily paced the narrow strip between the fireplace and the window, her footsteps muffled but insistent, each one carving deeper into the silence that had swallowed the room whole. Jack rubbed at the metallic sting on his lip, eyes darting from his sisters as if searching for an anchor in their expressions. "I can't keep doing this," he muttered, voice rough, like gravel underfoot. "Every time we talk, it's the same, poking at old wounds, pretending we can stitch them up with words." His drive clawed at him, that gnawing need to carve out his place amid the fragments of their shared history. But uncertainty coiled tighter, whispering of the love he might shatter if he pushed too far. Martha leaned forward, her self-reflective gaze softening with a thread of hope. Even as the weight of the evening pressed down, she wanted to bridge them, to voice her own tangled regrets, without the sharp edge that so often sliced others away. "Jack, we're not pretending. This is us, finally seeing each other. I've been so critical, haven't I? Dismissing what you feel, because it scares me to hear it." Her words hung, vulnerable, seeking the understanding she craved, fearing the dismissal that might echo back. But Emily stopped pacing, her back to them, shoulders rigid against the empty grate. Frustration burned in her chest, determined to spill the bottled truths she'd guarded too long. Yet the fear of rejection loomed larger now, isolation's chill seeping through her resolve. She turned slowly, eyes glistening not with tears, but with the raw edge of something breaking free. As the eldest, the one who'd always shouldered the unspoken burdens, she felt the walls closing in, corners sharp with their confessions, professional echoes from David's session still ringing like accusations. The web of their pains tangled around her, Jack's rebellion hiding his terror of abandonment, Martha's hope masking her alienating judgments, her own avoidance festering into this desperate ache. "I can't," Emily said, her voice cracking like thin ice under pressure. She met their stares, the room's oppressive hush amplifying the tremor in her breath. "You both lay it all bare, and it guts me. But I'm done carrying this for us. I need to go, really go, focus on my own life, my own scars, before they drag me under with yours." The words tumbled out, irreversible, a severance sharper than any blade. She saw the shock ripple across their faces, Jack's uncertainty blooming into wide-eyed panic, his fear of losing them igniting like dry tinder. Martha's hopeful reflection fracturing, her dread of misunderstanding twisting into silent plea. Jack rose halfway from the armchair, the fabric rasping against his jeans. Wait, you can't just—" But she shook her head, the longing etching lines around her mouth. A deep, pulling yearning for the family they might have been, if only the truths hadn't exposed the fractures so cruelly. The air thickened with it, that shared ache for connection amid the ruin, a melancholic hope flickering like the lamp's dying flame. Martha reached out a hand, tentative, her critical shadow yielding to the moment's raw need. Emily's gaze lingered on them, the oppressive weight of the parlor bearing down. Yet in the contemplative pause that followed, a fragile thread of possibility stirred, longing, unyielding, binding what words had tried to break. In the suffocating hush that settled over the parlor, the lamplight wavered like a faltering heartbeat, casting elongated shadows that mirrored the family's unraveling bonds. Martha's white-knuckled grip loosened only slightly, her eyes tracing the void where David had stood, as isolation seeped into their bones like damp fog. Jack's twisted features softened into quiet torment, each breath a contemplative surrender to the guilt blooming within. Beneath the oppressive weight, a faint glimmer of hope flickered, vulnerable yet insistent, drawing them inexorably into the raw confrontation ahead. Outside, the distant rumble of a truck's engine growled through the night, mechanical and indifferent. Inside, Jack's breath caught, ragged against the parlor's stifling hush. He shifted on the worn armchair, its springs creaking like a confession withheld too long. Emily stood by the mantel, her fingers tracing the edge of a faded photograph, her parents, smiling in a sunlit garden that felt like another life. David paced the perimeter of the rug, his shoes scuffing softly against the frayed wool, each step a measured attempt to bridge the chasm widening between them. "I can't keep pretending," Emily said finally, her voice threading through the dimness like a needle seeking fabric. She turned, eyes locking on Jack's, the lamplight carving hollows beneath her cheekbones. Frustration etched her features, but determination burned brighter, pushing past the walls she'd built to avoid this very unraveling. "We've all been walking on eggshells since the accident. Dad's gone, and we're ghosts in our own home. I feel it every day, this ache, like I'm screaming inside and no one hears." Jack's throat tightened. He wanted to bolt, to mask the uncertainty gnawing at him with some sharp retort, that old rebellion flaring as armor. But the fear pinned him, losing them, the only tether to who he might become. "What do you want me to say, Em? That I don't belong here? That every time I look at you two, I see the kid who wrecked everything?" His words tumbled out, raw and searching, probing for his place amid the ruins. The air thickened with the scent of old books and cooling tea, oppressive as the weight of unspoken years. David stopped pacing, his hand hovering mid-air before dropping to his side. Conflict twisted his expression. He craved harmony, yet this confrontation clawed at his resolve, stirring the turmoil he dreaded. Always the mediator, skimming surfaces to dodge the depths, but not tonight. "Jack, that's not it. We've all carried this guilt like a chain. I pushed too hard after Mom left, trying to hold us together, but I ignored how it broke you both." His voice cracked, vulnerability seeping through the cracks in his composure. He met their gazes, proactive now, forcing the shadows into light. "I see it. My own avoidance, pretending work and routines could fix what's fractured inside. Emily, your silence, it's killing us. And Jack, your anger, it's not rebellion. It's the hurt we've all fed."
Emily's shoulders slumped, the bottled storm breaking in a rush of tears she didn't bother to hide. Isolation loomed, rejection specter. But in this bearing, acceptance flickered, tentative, hopeful.
"I was so afraid you'd turn away if I said it, that loving me meant enduring me, flaws and all."
She stepped closer, bridging the space, her hand finding Jack's knee. He grasped it, uncertain fingers steadying. The parlor's shadows softened, not dissolving, but yielding to the fragile glow of truth. Guilt coiled in their chests, abandonment's echo from choices past. Yet in the confessions, a thread of connection wove through, promising perhaps, against the oppression, a way forward. David's nod was small, but it carried the weight of commitment, their pains entangled now, no longer solitary burdens. In that contemplative pause, vulnerability bloomed, raw and redemptive, a quiet hope amid the melancholy.
As the hours stretched into the small hours, the parlor's hush deepened into an oppressive shroud. The photograph's frozen smiles a mocking reminder of fractures unhealed. Jack's ragged breath steadied into quiet resolve, mirroring Emily's, the youngest, fingertips lingering on the frame, igniting a spark of buried courage amid the melancholy weight. Dawn crept in reluctantly, drawing them toward the family hearth where shadows of truth waited, poised for cathartic release. The parlor, that ragged midnight hour. Emily's hand lingered on the photograph's frame, the cool glass a fragile barrier to the past. David rose from the armchair, his shadow stretching across the threadbare rug like a question mark. The floorboards groaned under his weight, a low protest in the room's hush. Martha sat perched on the edge of the settee, her knees drawn close, fingers interlaced as if weaving invisible threads between them all. The mantel clock ticked onward, each second a deliberate pull toward the unspoken. "I've held this in too long," Emily said, her voice cracking the quiet like a pebble in still water. She turned from the photo, eyes locking on David first, then Martha. Frustration etched lines around her mouth, but her chin lifted, determined. "We pretend everything's fine, the visits that fizzle out, the calls that go unanswered. But it's not. I need you to see me, really see me, not the sister who fades into the background." David halted midway across the room, his proactive stride faltering. He wanted harmony, the kind that smoothed edges without cutting too deep. But the air pressed in, thick with the scent of old books and cooling tea. His fear coiled tight, turmoil he couldn't outrun. "Emily, this isn't the time," he murmured, though his tone carried the weight of his own evasion. Superficial words had always been his shield, keeping feelings at arm's length. Yet now, facing her raw gaze, he felt the fracture widening. Martha leaned forward, her self-reflective hope flickering like candlelight on the wall's faded wallpaper. She craved understanding, a bridge across their divides. But the risk of dismissal gnawed at her. "Wait," she interjected softly, her voice measured, though criticism lurked in its undertone. "She's right, David. We've all been dancing around it. Our parents' absence, the way it carved us into pieces. I criticize to make sense of it, but maybe that's just my way of hiding how lost I feel." Emily stepped closer, the rug's worn fibers brushing her bare feet, grounding her in the moment. Her heart pounded, isolation's shadow looming, but she pushed through the bottled storm. "Tell me then, what have you hidden? David, you act like the fixer, but I see it. You're afraid of the mess inside yourself. And Martha, your questions cut because you're scared we'll turn away. I'm done avoiding this." They reached out, hands bridging the space, truth spilling like long-held breaths released. The clock ticked on, but the weight lifted, just enough to glimpse a mended path ahead.